All right, everyone loves pirates here with the Future of the Fortress reply for September 2018. As always, I have nothing to do with the development of Dwarf Fortress. This is Toadie's replies to the questions that are asked on the forums, and once a month he goes through all the ones that have been asked since the previous one and answers them. So if you have any specific questions about future stuff for Dwarf Fortress, that would be the place to do it. And as always, there will be links in the description where you can read this yourself. Because especially this time, I edited it down quite a bit. Probably did half of the questions made the cut, and tried to keep some of the questions a little and answers a little shorter as well. But this should take about 20 minutes at the most. And yeah, I'll get going. So, question from Real Bang. What are you planning on doing from the devlog after the villain arc? And Toadie says, basically, we have the armies and siege stuff left. Time is obviously feeling tight after the horrible summer, but it's important to leave everybody, with a decent DF so we can do it all. I'm not 100% decided. Want to fix more bugs, handle stress, and other large issues as well. Which actually kind of ties in a little bit to the very last question, but I'll opine when we get there. But essentially, he's got army and siege stuff left after the villain arc, but I am interested a lot in the bug fixes as well. So, question from Buttery Mess: do you think it will be possible to simplify Venture Mode into a set of rules that could be used as a pen and paper role-playing game? And Toadie did link to something Patrick Lundell said. I kind of left it out because he essentially went over all of it in his answer. But he says, yeah, as Patrick Lundell implies, I got into video games for a reason, and one of them was data processing. The checks / etc. are generally beyond what people would tolerate at the table. That's not to say you couldn't make a pen and paper game that aligned vaguely with what we were going for, but I'm not sure how much different it would be from one of the more intricate ones that already exist, aside from whatever setting-based stuff we have, which is never really focused on. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know. For me, that's the sort of stuff that I would think would be horrible to do in pen and paper. I'm very, very happy to let the program figure out all the rules and stuff, so I can just enjoy playing instead of having to do tons of math or something. But some people like that. A quote from True Wolves: do you think it would ever be possible for a character object or any other entity to cross between completely different generated worlds? And Toadie links Patrick Lundell again. It would be extremely messy as worlds have raws, and if you try to mix and match, you end up with conflicting and missing definitions. And then Toadie adds, to add to that reply, we had some weird issues in the past, like trying to have a shared afterlife between our games where some universal format could be uploaded. This aligns also with the notion of editors somewhat. So it's the sort of thing that could theoretically be explored, but also isn't a focus of what we're doing. Still, it might end up on the table, especially if, to aid editing, we end up with something like an export universal def option for generating objects for use later in the editors. Long sentence. Those text files might be transferable. That's what it says. But as in Patrick Lundell's example, nothing gets around conflicting names, etc. So something has to give. So, I mean, I'll admit that's something I've wanted in the past. Just be, oh man, it'd be so neat to pull this character over into this other world. But obviously, there's a lot of issues with that, and we shouldn't expect anything new to happen there for probably quite a while. Okay. Question from Oreos. With the new villains you are working on, I was wondering will villainous plots form around adventure mode characters and their party, and maybe even within the player's party, like Betrayal. Toadie says the focus is when we get there. When we get there will be on the adventurer investigating villains and the adventurer being a villain. Now, companions might be villains or villainous agents, if this isn't a party you create yourself, but that will restrict their ability to act generally since they are stuck with you when you aren't sending them away. When it comes to intra-party intrigue and party infiltration, probably not going to do anything specific with that on account of time, though we do want the villain to act against the player adventurer in more overt ways at a bare minimum. So obviously you can investigate villains as an adventurer, you can be a villain as an adventurer, but you shouldn't really necessarily expect within your party to be a lot of villainous stuff happening between the members, it sounds like, which is probably a good thing. All right, another question from Real Bang. One, will you be able to marry someone in adventure mode? And two, will you be able to set links with your adventure party members, such as childhood friend, war buddy, wife, brother, etc.? And Toady links two people's responses. Tinacork says, I think I read in a recent answer that the idea is to be able to play with your descendants, so yes, but I don't think it's planned for any time soon since there is already a lot of things being considered for development. And Demonic Gopher says, both 1 and 2 are definitely in the long-term plans, but not necessarily in the next release. Which isn't surprising. All right, question from Button. 1, are you touching Fortress mode relationships before the next release? Most notably, will childhood friends and war buddies become relationships that can occur in Fort mode too, or just in World Gen? Or are they a shorthand for just different circumstances under which people can become friends? Toady says it's shorthand currently. Fort mode theoretically already has childhood friendships. Not that friendships are working well generally, and children perhaps are especially broken. Though it doesn't really have a war buddy notion. People in squads are often closer to each other. Adding socializing on raids would of course be a plus there. Overall, we are hoping to get to some of the World Gen ideas translated over to Fortress mode, but stuff like divorce and affairs and so on will be more important for what we're working on. So, yeah, that's, it's the common stuff you see already in Fortress mode. I didn't realize that children's kind of friendship making stuff was especially broken. But, if different dwarves spend more time with each other, such as maybe guys in the military training together, are obviously going to have links between them. Whereas, like, all your idle dwarfs that are just, sitting in the tavern and getting drunk, they become master socializers and get, elected mayor and crap like that. So, and you obviously always see a bunch of interconnecting relationships there as well. But number 2, do you take personalities and values into account when making World Gen friendships or just in-game friendships? He says mostly not. There's a speed issue, and also the fact that World Gen figures are not in decision-making positions. Not in decision-making positions. Often don't have personalities initialized due to memory overhead. So that's just a technical limitation thing there. World Gen can crawl enough as it is, but once you'd add in taking personality and values into account for friendships, it would probably be way too much, according to the way I read his answer. Number 3, is remarriage after being widowed or abandoned doing the night creature transformation in the cards for the next release? World Gen, Fort mode, both. He says, yeah, it's in World Gen now, should also appear in Fort mode before I'm through. And of course, if you saw the most recent updates for just the development over the past month, he goes into big detail on actually following someone who had 2 marriages. And I highly recommend checking that out, reading it, or you can watch my video that's already up. Question from Rubik. So Word says that you personally look at least the op of every suggestion thread. What are the types of suggestion threads that are most useful, interesting to you, Toady? So for those of you, I left this in like maybe you're involved in the forums or you'd like to get involved and you have suggestions. These are the types of essentially the best things to focus on for the different types of suggestions, I think. It's a bit vague, but anyways, he says, it depends on the topic. The simple usability suggestions can sometimes go in as stated, and then it's best if it's just clear what you're asking for and why, so I can think about the larger context. When we get over to feature suggestions, what I generally look for is the underlying problem that the player has, if any, since I'm often in a better position to come up with the solution that works for me, and the specifics don't matter sometimes in that case. For other kinds of suggestions, ones that are real-world directed, such as dyes or something, highly specific sourced information is best. If I know there's some legit pathway for a given color or whatever, then I can think of how it might be implemented and have the material, process, etc. Information at hand. But yeah, I read every op and often more. It's impossible at this point to read every reply. Fortunately, ops will often incorporate good discussion. Their new threads will be created based on them, so I think we're collectively doing pretty well. Hard for the development to catch up, though, naturally. And obviously, for any game, the suggestions will always way outweigh what the developer ever gets to or even wants in his game. To be honest, some people. I haven't looked at the Dwarf Fortress threads for this, but I know in other games people often offer suggestions that like have nothing to do with the game. It would turn the game into a completely different type of game. But there you go. So simple usability stuff. Just be clear what you're asking for in the larger context of things. Feature suggestions. What's the problem you're having? So he knows how to fix that essentially. And then for materials and real world kind of stuff, just source some specific information for him when you give the suggestion, so he doesn't have to do all the research himself. That's my summary, at least. Question from Patrick Lundell. I hope the added relationship versions make it into Fortress mode. Will we see children born out of wedlock and have the possibility of getting remarriages there, as well as spouses cheating on each other with lovers on the side? Yes, anticipating that all the marriage lover changes will make it over. Second question, is the age difference limitation for marriage lifted / modified in the process? So I actually didn't realize there was a limitation on age for marriage, like between two different people. So just the answer to this one just helped give me some more insight on how the game works. So before I read the answer, essentially right now it stands at you can only marry someone who's plus or minus 10 years from you. Which has always been my personal range, too. Well, not always. Like, when I was 16, I wouldn't marry a 6-year-old or something. But anyways, Tony says the age limit was modified, in fact. When I was looking through the legends at some point, I found a 176-year-old unmarried elf, and it turned out there was simply nobody in the plus to minus 10-year age range. And, of course, no elves in that age band could ever be produced again, so that was it. Because if you don't know, elves are essentially don't die from old age. So now it uses plus minus, and I'm not going to give this formula. It's here if you want to read it. It's on the screen. I have no idea how to read that or even figure out what it means in English. So if you like math and you can figure out stuff that has commas instead of operators, and then go ahead. And there's extra fudging over time if matchmaking fails, or will be. Okay. Question from Lamond. Will we ever get any tools or features to help deal with aquifers, or is this meant to be an ever-present obstacle for the sake of realism? I haven't been particularly quiet on how I feel about aquifers. I haven't raged on aquifers or anything, but I've on many occasions just, I don't know, it just doesn't fit my play style having to screw around with an aquifer. So I specifically look for embarks that don't have it, or it's only in one of the biomes so I can dig around it or whatever. Yeah, so the answer to this, apparently, is Tony says, I have the general sense that different aquifer speeds might be in order. Right now there are kind of, not really, like these artisan aquifer pictures where the water is like sploosh. But there's the other notion of just like a somewhat drippy cavern that might need some occasional helping and some pumping down below. The latter would be pretty easy to set up, probably with little 1/7 of water just popping out every so often, piling up if they aren't dealt with. I've forgotten what's correct now, having not studied aquifers for many, many years. So, and I cut out a little bit more from that was just some added detail that it wasn't really necessary for the answer. Well, not necessarily that, but anyways. So if I'm reading this right, and it's kind of weirdly worded, or at least it seems that way to me at 1 a.m., that essentially one of the things he could do, instead of just having like a 7/7 water depth layers for the aquifer, you might have something more like a cavern that has water that seeps in slowly that you can fairly easily deal with, but if you don't, it'll fill up a bit. And I would like that. I like some different variety, if nothing else. I feel, I don't know, I just feel that I avoid aquifers. I don't like avoiding parts of games. But I do feel that, you avoid the things that aren't fun. And aquifers are really difficult to deal with. Now, some of you may not think that's the case, but even like the main thing is like dropping sections into the aquifer so you can like dig through, or it punches a hole through or whatever. I've seen people do that. I've seen it work. I've never tried it myself, but it's a lot of work. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a particular challenge that people can have if they want. So maybe the better kind of option would be in the inits or whatever to have an option of original aquifers or diverse aquifers, or maybe only these 1/7 seeping aquifers or something. But it would be nice to see it addressed in some way, because I think a lot of people right now just avoid them entirely. Okay, question from Falk. What are your ideal plans for carrying items? Will there ever be volume restrictions, physical encumbrance from anything besides armor or pure weight? Will strapped to your body items require strings, sinew, or leather straps at some point in order to actually strap them on? Will venture item hauling, which sort of buggily exists, ever be more of a dragging across the ground thing or a shoving to the next tile thing? I'll read his response first before I go into this. We had a side project some years back, he says, that had a little paper doll inventories and required absolutely everything you need to carry stuff. Adhesive, knots, all of whatever. It was marginally annoying, but also sort of cool. Adventure mode has slowly been leaning that way. So I'm tempted to go all the way over into that mode as long as the controls don't get more nested and annoying. So there need to be some automated steps to the related actions by default. I don't think dwarf mode could support it easily, all the junk items especially. Pushing and dragging are all fair and fun, and they make for good rune puzzles and so forth, or at least traditional ones. Having an item block a tile can be a bit annoying, but we have the constructed tiles that track items, which might work out for items that should block. This also fits in with those item pile tiles and moving fortress pieces and all that. Ways to respect volume and items on the map. Some of that's very hard, though. Essentially, this just comes down to inventory management, more or less. I've been pretty vocal on any game that I am not a fan of inventory management. I don't find it enjoyable. When it comes to a lot of RPGs, like, Elder Scrolls stuff or whatever, I usually go into the console and I just put encumbrance, limit way up. And then I can set like personal limits for myself to make the gameplay, still role play correctly. But when it comes to like, you clear out a cave or something, or a fortress, or, whatever it happens to be, and you have to make like 6 different trips back to town to sell off all the items. I mean, you could just leave them there, but apparently I can't. So it's not fun gameplay to just haul items back and forth because you can't carry them all at once. It's a level of realism that I don't particularly want in a game. I don't think a lot of people do particularly want that in a game. So with that bias in mind, I don't really want him to do any overhaul of the inventory stuff, especially anything requiring adhesive or knots. He does mention, if they did it, it'd probably have to be some automated steps and stuff. But the UI is iffy enough as it is. If just to deal with your inventory, you had to, memorize a bunch of different menus or, nested controls and stuff, then I don't know. It sounds like it'd be not very fun to me, but I would still play the game. It's Toadie's game. He can do whatever the heck he wants. As for being able to drag stuff around, that could be kind of cool. I'm not really sure what the use would be, except for like moving furniture around or something, but there you go. And then the last question from Immortal D. I think I might get really close to getting under 20. He says, I know that testing long-term mechanics is difficult for you due to the time required. That said, are you aware of current issues with the new stress system? Based on reports here and in Reddit, stress-reducing effects seem greatly underpowered compared to stress-causing effects. So like I said, this kind of relates to the stress answer that he gave at the very beginning. But he does say, yeah, I have that thread in my next version before the big wait version text file. I think I'll need to look at and log data on some saves for some of the problems until we're satisfied that we understand what happened with a lot of the dwarves and their specific pathways to negativity. It'll be interesting to see how much of a portion of the stress is caused by probably easily fixables like those repeated vulture interruptions, which is pure combat stress, I think, rather than just stress at being interrupted, which doesn't exist, versus more systematic changes, which will be harder to rebalance, but are clearly needed for certain reoccurring thoughts and broken/missing needs. So if you've watched my Island Hideout, you saw the effects of stress and how it just spiraled, and there's nothing I could do. I can never fix it. Even if I got rid of all the initial stress issues, or most of them at least, the people were just too far gone. The positive stress never could overcome the negative stress. Because they had, they're eating masterpiece meals and they're living in royal quarters and, royal dining rooms and all that kind of stuff. But they just could never get over, apparently, all the were-lizard stuff that happened. So anyways, talked about that plenty in the past and apparently just now as well, but he is aware of it. He is going to work on it. It seems like it is a priority. He just needs some more save files, and he's going to probably focus on it as soon as the villain arc comes out, and it'll be part of the bug fixes that go along with that release. So there you go. 21 minutes with commentary. I think is pretty good for one of these. Again, I left out a ton of questions. I tried to pick the ones that were most interesting to me, but it doesn't mean the ones I skipped wouldn't be interesting to you. So if you'd like to, feel free, and I encourage you to go read the entire section of that thread where he lists and answers all the questions. That'll be linked in the description as always. And if you haven't already seen it, as I mentioned before, I did do the in September, just his current development update for what he's currently working on. That should probably be on the screen now as a little thing if I know how to use all the new YouTube crap correctly. So you can click on that if you haven't already seen it, just to see how close he's getting to finishing off this this villain release. And there's a really cool, at the end of it, I read through verbatim a whole section of an example he gives where he delves into, as I kind of already mentioned before, he found a character that had 2 marriages, got remarried, and follows them and like their spouse and their kids and the grandkids. And it was really quite interesting. I'm really looking forward to all these new links and relationships and obviously the villain stuff as well. I think that's going to... I don't know if it's going to be like a new game necessarily, but I think it's going to be a significant addition to adventure mode, and even Legends mode and stuff. But I think it'll be really cool. So anyways, thanks for watching, folks. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.